Financial futures contracts, example 2. In December, Treasury receives notification of a borrowing requirement of 10 million ringgit in March for 6 months the following year. This means that we are in December, right? And you receive, suppose we are a treasurer, we receive a notification of borrowing requirement of 10 million in March. So we are in December, 3 months later, we want to borrow 10 million ringgit, but this time we want to borrow for 6 months, not for 3 months, right? You remember these futures contracts, they are 3-month contracts. So their life is 3 months. But here we want to borrow for 6 months, right? The Treasury uses KLIBOR futures to set a borrowing rate for a period of 6 months rather than just 3 months by using March and June futures. So there are 2 options available. Here I want to show you one of them. And I have prepared this slide, which is very helpful. So I have summarized the information that you need. So in December, which is now, March KLIBOR futures is priced at 90.94, and June KLIBOR futures is priced at 90.44. So the 3-month KLIBOR futures and March means 3 months later, June means 6 months later. You have the price of these futures contracts in the market today. And now, how to hedge? You want to borrow, based on the question, you want to borrow 3 months later in March, right? You want to borrow here in March for 6 months. And I have given to you the information of KLIBOR rates in March and in June, and also the price of March KLIBOR futures in March and June KLIBOR futures in June. Now, let's see how we can hedge. So first, what is the concern here for the treasurer? The treasurer wants to borrow 3 months later at the that date rate, right? So the concern is what happens. The concern is what happens if the interest rate goes up. So again, let's go back to slide that I already showed. So my concern is if interest rate goes up, this means my concern is the underlying asset price, means debt instrument price goes down. This means that I'm long on the underlying asset, so I should short futures contract. So here I have summarized what you need to do step by step. Number 1, you already received a notification of intended borrowing of 10 million ringgit in March for 6 months. So today we know we need to borrow for 6 months in March. Now we know that we should short futures contracts, right? So what I do is I short 10 March futures contract. Why 10? Because it's 10 million ringgit, and each contract, I multiply the size of each contract is 1 million. So you need 10 contracts. So I short 10 March futures contract, and then I short 10 June futures contracts. And all rates have been given to you here. Why? Because because these 10 March futures contract will lock in the interest rates for these 3 months, for March till June, and then the 10 June futures contract will cover the second cycle, right? Means from June till September, right? The next 3 months. Okay. So later in March, as we following the initial plan, I will borrow 10 million ringgit. You remember in the question, the main thing was we want to borrow 10 million ringgit in March, and we just want to lock in, right? We just want to lock in the interest rate. We just want to make sure that if interest rate goes up, we won't be affected. So what I do is, so I borrow 10 million ringgit in March as it was the plan, but now I need to close my position on the March futures contract. So what I do is I buy 10 futures contract in March. So I close this position, and then in June, okay, the life of this borrowing is 3 months, right? So after 3 months, I need to roll over the borrowing. So in June, again, I borrow for 3 months. So here, but the issue is here again, maybe the interest rate has increased, right? So how to lock in this interest rate? I already short 10 June futures contract. So these 10 June futures contracts, the cell, the number 3, has covered the interest, has locked in the interest rate over this period, which is from June onwards, the 3 months after June. So now I roll over borrowing. It means I borrow again, and I buy 10 June futures contract to close my 10 June futures contracts, right? So again, what happens? Often I receive the notification that I need to borrow 3 months later for a period of 6 months. I need to lock in the interest rate for these 6 months from March onwards, 6 months starting from March. But the KLIBOR futures can only cover 3 months because their life is a three months. Their life of this contract is 3 months. So I need 2 contracts. The first one will lock in the interest rate from March till June. The second one will cover the interest rate, lock in the interest rate from June till September. So immediately when I receive the notification of borrowing in March, I short 10 March futures contract, I short 10 June futures contracts. Then I already did everything that I was supposed to do in December. I wait until March. Now in March, I need to borrow, as it was the plan, 10 million ringgit. So I borrow in March. Now let's close the position on the 10 March futures contract, right? This is the maturity. So I just close the position by buying 10 March futures contract, and then I already locked in the interest rate for borrowing 10 million ringgit in March. Then in June is the maturity of my borrowing. So it's a 3 month. It's already in June, so I need to roll over the borrowing. So I roll over my borrowing in June for 3 months, but I already short 10 June futures contract to lock in the interest rate for my 3 month borrowing in June. So I just close the position. It's the time we need to close the position for futures contract and June futures contract. So I buy 10 June futures contracts. So that's all. So this means I covered 6 month period from March till September by 2 contracts, right? So the information have been given to you. Now let's complete the table. Again, this table has 2 columns, 2 rows, like what we discussed already. The first column is cash market or underlying asset market. The second column is futures market. So in December, you receive the notification of intended borrowing of 10 million ringgit in March for 6 month period. This means that you should, okay, we already discussed, we already know here we should short futures contract. So I short 10 March futures at 90.94 is a March KLIBOR futures price. This means that the interest rate 100 minus 90.94 means it's 9.06%, right? Means the KLIBOR rate for this contract means the interest rate based on this contract, the interest rate in March will be 9.0.6. Then I short 10 June futures at what price? 90.44. In December, the price of June futures contract is given. So 100 minus 90.44 is 9.56%. Okay, done. Then in March, as it was the plan, we borrow 10 million ringgit in the interbank market at the 3 month rate of, so now what is the rate? We assume in March the rate is 9.68%. Suppose the interbank rate is 9.6%. So we borrow at this rate, And now, what is the interest expense? 9.68%, and you borrow 10 million ringgit. Let's write 10M, and it's just for 3 months, right? 90. You adjust it for 3 months. This means that the interest expense is 242,000 ringgit. Is the interest on this borrowing. Now, in March, you need to close your position on 10 March futures contract. So what you need is you just long 10 March futures at, now what is the rate? March KLIBOR futures is priced at 90.28, or I would say is the interest is 9.272%. So you long the 10 March futures at 90.28. This means that you short at 90.94, you long at 90.28. So your gain is on this contract is 90.94 minus 90.28. This means that 66 basis points, and we already know that the tick size is 25 ringgit. This means multiply by 10 contracts means 16,500 ringgit profit. So I apply this here, and the net or effective interest expense is 242,000 minus 16,500 means 225,500. This is the net interest expense, right? So the interest expense I paid on this 10 million ringgit based on the 9.68% is 242,000. But I have some profit from the futures contract from the time that the short in December March futures contract. So I deduct, and then effective interest expense is 225,000. So the effective interest rates is 225,000 ringgit divided by 10 million that I borrowed, then apply, then this was for 3 months, but if we want to report the interest rate per year, multiply by 100 to report it in percentage. So its effective interest rate so far is 9.02%, right? Now, so far we have computed the effective interest rate here. Now let's go to the next cycle, which is June. So in June, what I need to do is first I need to roll over borrowing at 9.98%, where I got this here, 9.98. Suppose in June, now we want to roll over the borrowing, we want to, it means extend the borrowing, but I have to borrow now at 9.98%. And this means that the interest expense is 10 million ringgit multiplied by 9.98%. Then I adjust it for 3 month borrowing. This means 249,500 is the interest expense for 10 million borrowing. At 9.98%, but we already have a 10 June futures contract. We short 10 June futures contract in December. Now we need to close this 10 June futures contract. So in the futures market, I long the 10 June futures contract at what price? Here is given to you. June KLIBOR futures contract is priced at 90.05. So I long at 90.0. This means that the interest rate is 9.95%, right? So now, do we have a profit or loss? We have you long at this price, 90.05, and you already short at this price. So you have a profit. Selling minus purchase, let's say, is give you 39 basis point profit. So now you convert into ringgit. So 39 multiplied by 25 ringgit tick size, 10 contracts. This means 9,750 ringgit profit. Now you take this here. So the effective interest expense is 249,500, which was the cost of borrowing 10 million ringgit, minus the profit from the contract, futures contract. This means that your net expense is 239,750 ringgit. Now let's compute the effective interest rate. So divided by 10 million, then multiply by, because this is a 3-month contract, we adjust it per year, and then I want to report in percentage. This means that the effective interest rate for the second 3-month cycle is 99.59% per year. Now, so interest rate for the first cycle is 9.02, for the second cycle is 9.59. Now, let's compute the interest rates, overall interest rate for the whole 6-month period. Let's see on average at what price, at what interest rates we borrowed the 10 million ringgit over the 6-month period. So the first period, as we already computed, was the first 3 months here. The first 3 months, we borrowed at 9.02%. The second 6 months, we borrowed at 9.59%. I adjusted them adjusted them for the 3-month period. This means that it's 2.255 and 2.398% for 3-month period. This is actually because the previous one was per year, right? But this is the interest that I'm paying for 3-month period, right? I just divided them by 4 because it's just for 3 months, right? So for the first period and second period, the first 6 months and second 6 months, I have the interest rate. Now, what is the interest rate for 6-month period? This 6-month period, we already know from previous subjects that a long-term interest rate is the average of future short-term interest rates, right? So 1 plus interest rate multiplied by 1 plus this interest rate is 1 plus this interest rate, right? So if you compute, it will give you 4.75% for a period of 6 months. This means for a year is you just multiply by 2, 9.42%. This means the effective interest rate for the borrower per year is 9.42%. So we locked in the interest rate for 6-month borrowing at 9.42% per year.